Around 20,000 years ago, rising sea levels cut off Japan from mainland Asia. What happened next was one of the most unique cultural evolutions in history. Ancient Japan was a place of mystery, a place where legend blended with fact, where shaman queens and emperor gods reigned supreme, and tombs fit for giants were built by ghosts. This is the mysterious lives of the ancient Japanese. HIROTA people. On the island of Tanegashima, off the southern tip of Japan, there was a group of people doing some strange things to their babies' heads. Archaeologists recently uncovered evidence that the HIROTA people, who inhabited the island from the 3rd to 7th centuries AD, intentionally deformed the heads of newborns. Artificial cranial modification, as it's called, isn't unique to Japan. Certain cultures on every continent have messed around with the shape of their heads. The Mayans and the Inca did it in South America. The Mayans apparently thought an elongated forehead looked pretty cool and was a good way to differentiate the nobility from the peasants. Egyptian pharaohs did it, so did many Pacific Islanders, Central Africans, Native Americans, and Chinese. But unlike a lot of these other cultures, the HIROTA people prefer to flatten the back of their skull. We don't know why they did it this way. Did it make it more comfortable to sleep on their backs? Maybe, maybe not. We don't really know that much about the HIROTA people at all, to be honest. There are a lot of different reasons cultures practice artificial cranial modification. Others did it for aesthetic reasons. A nice elongated head was considered beautiful by a lot of people. Others did it for religious reasons. People on the Pacific island of Vanuatu still shape their babies' heads because it resembles one of their gods. The HIROTA people could have modified their skulls for any of these reasons, but most everything we know about them has disappeared from history, the first of many mysteries we'll see as we move through the history of ancient Japan. Emperor JIMMU. One of the first distinct cultures we know about in Japan is called the Jomon culture. The Jomon period lasted for an astonishing 14,000 years, from about 13,000 to 500 BC. While it wasn't a single continuous society by any means, it's known for its distinct pottery, some of the earliest in the world. For scale, the time between the earliest Jomon pottery and the Middle Jomon period is twice as long as the time between the construction of the Great Pyramid and the 21st century. But despite all that, according to Japanese legend, the region was founded by a guy in the 7th century BC named Emperor JIMMU. Born in Miyazaki Prefecture in the south of Japan, JIMMU led his clan northeast with his two brothers. He had ambitions of ruling the entire country and wanted to do so from a more central location. After fighting some battles with rival clans along the way, JIMMU gets help from a three-legged crow that guides him across the Seto Inland Sea and into Yamato, where he decides to settle down and start his empire. In Japan, the three-legged crow is the messenger of the Shinto sun goddess Amaterasu, and JIMMU himself is thought to be her descendant. Once in Yamato, JIMMU climbed a mountain to survey the newly controlled Seto Inland Sea. He thought the shape of the land looked a lot like the heartstrings formed by mating dragonflies, imagery deeply embedded in Japanese culture as a symbol of love and partnership. But as he was waxing philosophical about the shape of the landscape, a mosquito landed on him and tried to steal his royal blood. Although the mosquito probably didn't even care if the blood was royal or not. But before the mosquito could do its business, a dragonfly swooped in and took out the would-be bloodsucker. Gangsta. The event inspired JIMMU to name Japan Dragonfly Islands, or Akitsushima in Japanese. JIMMU thus founded Japan's imperial line, and the island's rich history really kicked into high gear. Of course, a lot of this story is mythology. The story is from the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest historical/mythological text written in the early 8th century AD. There's no evidence that a man named JIMMU ever existed. However, historians do think that some of his tale has a basis in reality. If he did exist, most experts think he was alive much later than 600 BC. There is evidence that a powerful clan emerged during the Yayoi period, from 300 BC to 300 AD, and that he possibly could have been a ruler who conquered an area near Yamato around 60 BC. What's interesting is how Shinto religion, Japan's oldest religion, blended a belief system with the founding of an empire. Before JIMMU, Japan was in the so-called Age of the Gods, where the universe was in a state of primal chaos until the divine couple Izanagi and Izanami were born. They were tasked with creating the islands of Japan and other elements of the world. Then fast forward a bit and along came JIMMU. an actual earthly being who set the stage for human ingenuity and empire. The Shaman Queen. One of Japan's most mysterious rulers was a shaman queen who lived around the middle of the 3rd century AD during Japan's Yayoi period. Deep in the chambers of a heavily fortified castle, Queen Himiko sat on her throne. She was a recluse, unmarried, and rarely left the safety and solitude of her castle. Not many people even saw her ever. She was attended to by 1,000 female servants and one man who acted as her messenger to the outside world. She was known to cast spells on the people of Japan, bewitching them with magic and sorcery. The strange thing about Queen Himiko, even stranger than her living arrangements and sorcery, was the fact that she is absent from all Japanese historical accounts. The only reason we know anything about her at all is thanks to Chinese writers who mention her. She pops up in the records of the Three Kingdoms, a period in China when, true to the name, 3 rival kingdoms had emerged in China in the early 3rd century after one of the bloodiest periods of war in Chinese history. The Chinese records call Japan Wa and describe how Himiko had diplomatic relations with Wei, one of the 3 kingdoms. She sent tributes, servants, and fine linens and other valuables, and the Wei Emperor, Chao Rui, was pretty appreciative, writing that he appreciated her loyalty and filial piety, and that he expected her to rule her people in peace and to endeavor to be devoted and obedient. According to the Chinese, Himiko was a great queen, and Japan, or Wa, was a peaceful and orderly land that had a lot to offer. It of course helped that Himiko was giving them stuff. Before Himiko, Japan was in a state of chaos. Decades of war had ravaged the land, and it wasn't until the Shaman Queen rose to the throne that Japan was finally at peace. But when Himiko died, things got pretty bad again, pretty quick. According to the records of Wei, when Himiko passed away, a great mound was raised, more than 100 paces in diameter. Over 100 male and female attendants followed her to the grave. Then a king was placed on the throne, but the people would not obey him. Killings followed. More than 1,000 were thus slain. A relative of Himiko, named Iyo, a girl of 13, was then made queen and order was restored. Here's a question. Did Himiko exist? According to the Chinese, she did. She also wrote about the Samguk Sagi, Korea's oldest historical text. Her absence in Japan is one of history's most intriguing mysteries. From Emperor to God. Sometime in the mid-3rd century AD, Empress JIMMU was sailing back from a legendary victory military-wise in Korea. Her campaign there was nothing short of miraculous. According to the story, she led her forces to Korea without shedding a drop of blood, a testament to her strategy and maybe a little bit of divine intervention. Supposedly, she used a tide-turning maneuver, manipulating the tides to her advantage, which allowed her forces to cross over into the Korean peninsula easily and then rout the Koreans in battle. Even more impressive, JIMMU was apparently pregnant the whole time. I mean, like the whole time. The story goes that she was pregnant for a whole 3 years with one of the most legendary ancient Japanese emperors of all time, Ojin. Like many of these pre-written record emperors, Ojin's story is a mix of legend and fact, but most historians agree that he most likely existed. Ojin was supposedly born on that ship as his mother, Empress JIMMU, was on her way back from victory in Korea, and when he came to power, things really took off in Japan. During his reign, Japan saw a huge influx of cultural and technological influences from the Korean peninsula and China. Around the same time Ojin was in power, Japan started adopting practices like metallurgy and started making weapons and armor, ushering in a warrior culture that would become one of the defining characteristics of the Kofun period. Ojin also helped set up a bunch of diplomatic relationships with neighboring regions, including China and the Korean kingdoms that his mother went into and subjugated. These diplomatic ties helped facilitate cultural exchanges that influenced different aspects of Japanese society: art, religion, systems of governance. Things were changing under Ojin as Japan opened up to different regions. Ojin also consolidated power into a centralized government, something that his successor Nintoku did even more. When Ojin died, he was turned into a god, deified as Hachiman, the Shinto god of war and archery. Once again, the lines between history and myth were blurred. The transformation of Ojin into Hachiman was a big deal because it integrated Shinto beliefs with the social and political landscape. Saint Emperor. Historians don't know exactly when Emperor Nintoku lived, but they think sometime in the 4th century AD during the Kofun period. One of ancient Japan's most storied emperors took the throne. Emperor Nintoku was nicknamed Saint Emperor because he was one of the kindest guys in Japan, apparently. There's a story about him that goes like this. One morning, Nintoku was looking at the homes of the people of his realm from the walls of his palace. It was kind of cold out, but he noticed that none of the chimneys had smoke spiraling from them. He realized that this meant his people were too poor to afford even the basic necessities, which included fuel to cook their meals and heat their homes. Moved deeply by this realization, Emperor Nintoku made the decision to help everyone out by suspending taxes for a few years. Now, this act was not just a temporary relief, but a gesture that allowed the populace time to recover economically, to rebuild and rejuvenate. Everyone loved him for it, and he became a symbol of compassion and empathy, the ideal emperor. According to the Nihon Shoki, or the Chronicles of Japan, when Nintoku was born, a mystic owl stopped by to make sure everything went smoothly. Maybe a little more believable is the fact that Nintoku is credited with some of Japan's first large-scale engineering projects, including earthwork levees to help guard against flooding on the Kawachi Plains. Nintoku was so beloved, or maybe he loved himself so much, that his tomb is the largest in the world. The Daisen Kofun, as it's called, is a keyhole-shaped mound in Sakai, Osaka that spans nearly 1,600 feet in length. The sheer scale and size of the tomb even beats the Great Pyramids of Egypt in terms of ground area covered. And it wasn't just big. According to one legend, the massive tomb was surrounded by a moat filled with liquid mercury. Impossible, you say? Maybe, but the symbolism of mercury as a divine immortal element is pretty cool. And anyone trying to swim through mercury wouldn't have the best time. Besides the fact that it's almost 14 times denser than water, and you'd probably be slogging through it, it would probably eventually kill you. Could it have been more effective than a moat filled with alligators? Not sure. Tombs fit for giants. 160,000 tombs constructed, even on some of Japan's most remote islands. While smaller tombs were built during the Yayoi period, which lasted from around 300 BC to 300 AD, the tombs started taking steroids during the Kofun period from 300 to 538. The period itself is named after them. Kofun in Japanese means ancient grave. But the thing is, we don't have any idea who built them. Japan didn't have any written records back then, and the little we do know comes from those first historical/mythological texts, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, which weren't written until a couple of hundred years after the Kofun were built. What we do know is this: the Kofun period was a time of political consolidation, a time when an elite ruling class evolved, and the Japanese started getting really good at metallurgy and making tools and weapons. They were able to mobilize huge workforces to build these things. In the case of the Daisen Kofun, some 2,000 people over the course of 15 years. They were massive undertakings that represented an important shift in Japanese society and culture. The shape a lot of them take, a keyhole, is unlike any other tomb in the world, and it makes you think of a key in a doorway to the underworld. It is said that the people who built them, whoever they were, believed that the emperors who were buried in them would continue to rule or pass judgments from the afterlife. Another intriguing kofun is Hashihaka in Nara. This is one of the first large keyhole-shaped kofun ever built. It's nearly 1,000 feet long and 500 feet wide. It's thought that the tomb could belong to none other than Himiko, the shaman queen we talked about earlier. It's just a theory, but the dates seem to line up. Could she still be casting spells on us from the afterlife? Maybe we could go visit her kofun and find out. Except we can't. These kofun are off limits to just about everyone. Even archaeological work on them is limited by the Japanese government. They're considered sacred sites that should not be disturbed. The lack of access and study of these massive tombs just adds to their mystery. The death of Soga no IRUKA. By the time the 7th century rolled around, things were changing even more in Japan. Buddhism was starting to take hold and blend with Shinto beliefs. The very fabric of Japanese political structures was changing. One event in particular helped set the stage for the Taika Reform, a series of changes that further centralized power in the hands of the emperor. It was around this time that the Soga clan, particularly a guy named Soga IRUKA, started amassing a good deal of power, essentially controlling the Japanese imperial court from behind the scenes. His authoritarian style wasn't liked much by many of the other court nobles and clans who thought they were being given a raw deal by his policies. IRUKA then had a prince named Yamashiro Oi taken out. Yamashiro was the heir apparent to the throne and a popular guy in the imperial court, but it was the last straw for a lot of the nobility. So they hatched a plan to take IRUKA out. Prince Nakano Oi, who would later become Emperor Tenji, and a guy named Nakatomi Kamatari led the plot. You can imagine their meetings, cloaked in secrecy, maybe in the quiet shadow corridors of the imperial palace or in a secluded garden within the palace where they met late at night, strategizing. On the day of the hit, the court was gathered to receive a Korean embassy. Prince Nakano-oi, Nakatomi Kamatari, and their fellow plotters were ready to act. As the Empress Kojikyu was sitting on the throne, surrounded by Japanese nobility and the Korean delegation, Prince Nakano-oi stepped forward and accused SOGA no IRUKA of all kinds of crimes that included plotting against the imperial family. In the heated moment that followed the accusation, the prince drew his sword and lunged at IRUKA, wounding him. After that, Nakatomi and the other plotters who were hiding and waiting for the signal rushed forward and finished the job, dispatching IRUKA right in front of everyone. It was kind of like a Julius Caesar moment. Et tu, Brute? With IRUKA gone, his father, Soka Emishi, distraught and realizing that he and his clan were in a bad spot, took his own life, effectively ending the influence of the Soga clan. After the hit, Empress Kojikyu stepped down and her brother became emperor. Apparently, having someone taken out right in front of you without knowing about the plot wasn't a good sign that you were an effective ruler. The new head of state, Emperor Kotoku, then enacted the Taika reforms. Based on Confucian principles from the Chinese Tang dynasty, the reforms established what amounted to a system of centralized feudalism. All land basically now belonged to the emperor, and although lords could control those lands and the people on them, the imperial court had the final say on pretty much everything. Centralization meant that larger-scale infrastructure projects could take place. Roads were built, a central capital was created, bureaucracy was streamlined, and ancient Japan was quickly modernized to the point where the first writing emerged in the 8th century, including those two texts, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, the main reasons we know much of anything about what went on beforehand. Ancient Japan was a land shrouded in mystery. Myth and reality are hard to separate when we talk about what went on there pre-writing. But it's certainly a lot of fun to pick it apart and enjoy the ride, even if it does have things like three-legged crows, motes of Mercury, and emperors who turned to gods. Thanks for watching. What else do you want to learn about Japan? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Nutty History.